priorities, but that was the starting point. The topics we selected are definitely priorities that take a long time to be addressed, and we claim, based on our consultations with different political parties and current government and the opposition, etc., there's consensus that these are serious issues for Pakistan. I don't think anyone would say education is really not a priority, or child health is not a priority, or being more resilient to climate change and to floods is not a priority. So the topics are as follows, and the first two relate to human capital development, and it's almost going back to the basics. So as you mentioned, the first one, the order is not random. We really wanted to put the light on things that have been a little bit ignored, or at least are not on the front page of the news. I've been here more than 4 years. Every day there's front line about the level of reserves, the value of the rupee, or the inflation rate, and very important things. Rarely have I seen a headline that child stunting is indeed on average at 40%, and more worrisome, has been at 40% for the past 3 decades. And in some districts that's more than 60%. Rarely haven't seen a front page that says that 1 girl out of 4 reaches secondary school, or 1 child out of 3 that is school age is out of school. Is the highest rate in the world, with a few exceptions of conflict countries. These are, for us, and I'm sure for you as well, and as you said, these are alarming. We call this the silent human capital crisis, because it doesn't make the headline. It's slow. And I feel sometimes the country, because of its macroeconomic cycles and recurrent issues, is a bit in a trap of short-term attention, which is natural. When the economy needs immediate attention to stabilize, the focus is all on short-term priorities, and it's difficult to stay course on these long-term issues that take at least a decade to be addressed, but they can be addressed. On the positive side, this is where Indonesia was 20 years ago in terms of child stunting, and in a matter of 2 decades, they halved the stunting rate. Same in Peru, so it's feasible. These are not totally unrealistic things to improve these indicators on human capital. So child stunting is number 1. It's a complicated topic because it's a combination of different factors. Of course, it's a primary healthcare and nutrition topic, especially for adolescent girls, especially for pregnant mothers, and for babies in the first 1,000 days. Especially in rural areas. So it's a primary healthcare. But it is, because it's a nutrition topic, it's also an agriculture topic, and how much agriculture is nutritiously rich. It is also a family planning topic, an area that has impact on child stunting, because low birth spacing and early pregnancies are prime determinants of contributors to low growth of babies. I'm not a specialist, but the evidence is very clear on that. And that's an area that has massive impact more broadly in the economy, with very high fertility rates in Pakistan and the demographic transition that hasn't started. No matter how much you grow, it will be growth per capita. If you grow at 3%, basically growth per capita is close to 0 or 0.5. And the third contributor to child stunting, which has been a bit ignored in the narrative on child stunting and nutrition is, give nutritious supplement to pregnant mothers or to babies, and this will solve it. The problem is that the main determinant of issues with nutrition is partly how much intake babies and pregnant mothers get, but it's the quality of water. And the evidence of this, and Pakistan is special for this, the evidence for that is that, and that's good news actually, Pakistan dramatically reduced its poverty rates over the past 25 years, dramatically. In the world, it's probably the country that, compared to growth, because growth on average was quite low, poverty declined massively, which means people are eating better. Children are eating better, mothers and adolescent girls are eating better, but then the impact on stunting is null. If you look at poverty rate, the curve looks like this. If you look at stunting rate, it's flat. There's no other country where you see this. Usually when poverty declines, people eat better, stunting declines. Hasn't happened in Pakistan because of the poor quality of water and sanitation services. So what happens is that unclean water gets the guts contaminated, so the ability of mothers and newborns to absorb nutrients is very weak. And waterborne disease basically disrupts the mechanism of nutrition absorption. So water and sanitation is absolutely essential. This is why it's the third area that contributes to stunting. Sorry, I was long on stunting, and it's number one because it's really a massive issue that has lifelong consequences. If you don't act during the first 1,000 days since conception, it's irreversible. Basically, after 2 years, you cannot recover the lost growth of the babies. So it's massively important. I'll go faster on the other areas we picked. Second is, so by the way, when I say we're exiting from some topics, implicitly what's behind this is that we're exiting from, for example, tertiary healthcare, non-communicable disease. I mean, all things that are really important. I mean, all from the private sector, a strategy, a real strategy is less about what you're going to do, more about what you're dropping and things you're not going to do. That tells. And here what's behind this strategy is that we're exiting very important sectors like tertiary healthcare or non-communicable disease. Second one is education, and there we're going to focus on the basics. Primary education, the transition to secondary, especially for girls, and learning, improving learning outcomes, which means we're getting out of super important topics like higher education, like skills, like vocational training, like digital skills, immensely important, but others, I mean, the government intervenes on that, of course, and other partners do. So we'll focus on the basics. Third one, resilience to climate change, is a tough one because it can mean anything. Resilience to climate change can mean many things. So we're focusing on two things. Number one, the agriculture-water nexus, so the transition of agriculture to an agriculture that's more resilient to the impacts of climate change in terms of increased frequency and severity of heat waves and the scarcity of water, etc., and how it links to water. And that's a very difficult topic because it requires significant reforms that are very difficult in terms of addressing distortions in inputs in agriculture, in pricing, in water, you know, when water is free or when you know tube wells or electricity for tube wells is cheap, then the choices of crops are not optimal. So it's a very difficult topic. And the second one is resilience to floods, which means different things in the country along the Indus River. In Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, it's more nature-based solutions. In Sindh, it's more infrastructure investments, but we're going to focus on resilience to floods. Number four, the energy agenda. So we're both in terms of investment in renewables, hydropower, in which we've been present in Pakistan for a long time, but more fundamentally equally fundamentally addressing the structural issues that you're all aware of that hitting the sector in terms of its high cost, high efficiency issues and losses in transmission and distribution, and making the system more sustainable. And then air quality. So we're starting a big program in Punjab or the Greater Lahore area, maybe in Peshawar soon. All of this is part of a decarbonization agenda because most of the contributors to air pollution is basically carbon burning and emissions, and the transition to cheaper renewable energy will ultimately be the core solution to high energy prices. What's difficult is the transition. And then 5 and 6 is the usual structural reform agenda, the fiscal, first expenditures and revenues, which is in the news every day. So I don't need to spend too much time on that. Although I'd be interested to have your views on this. So these are the 6 outcomes we're going to focus on over the coming decade. Of course, there's transversal topics that are important to achieve these outcomes. So for 2 of them, we call them connecting communities. So the digital agenda, digital connectivity will be crucial in reaching a number of these outcomes. Taxation, for example, but private sector investment, but also use cases in education or health. And the second one is transport, in connecting, as you notice, transport is nowhere in our objectives, but if you want to improve attendance in school, it will be partly about building new schools and improving teacher training, attendance, etc. But it will be a lot about reducing time to reach school, especially secondary school, having safe transportation in rural areas, especially for girls, something we're focusing on. Same to access primary health care. So we'll do much less. We're exiting highways, we're exiting big transport logistics corridors and focusing more on access in rural areas to basic services, with link to the clean air agenda and e-vehicles, e-buses agenda to reduce emissions. The second transversal area is to protect the poor, so the social protection and financial inclusion agenda, which is important in all of these topics, giving incentives to parents to keep their girls in school or their boys in school as well. There's conditional cash transfers program in this, or nutrition cash transfer to support adopting family planning or nutrition interventions, as exists in SIN currently, that is starting. So that's overall what we're going to do. But one other change I should mention, and it's the title of the conference today, the role of private sector, is that globally for the World Bank Group, the bar in terms of trying to find private sector solutions to address these topics has gone significantly higher, meaning in every topic and every investment, we have an obligation to our board to see how we can open the space for private investment when it's relevant. And the reason behind is that no matter how much government resources go in these topics, no matter how much World Bank resources or other public resources go in any of these topics, it won't be enough. The needs in transmission investments to reach the target for outcome 4 on energy, the needs in terms of connectivity are so big. The needs in terms of access to water and sanitation in cities, for example, are so big. The private sector will need to have a role. And the press has been citing this strategy as a $20 billion loan to Pakistan. It seems big. In effect, if we can do $20 billion and we have the resources for that, and if the government wants to borrow that, it's about $2 billion a year. $2 billion a year is roughly 0.5% of GDP. That's not small, but this is not what will transform Pakistan. So it will be about mobilizing private sector investment, and super importantly, and in the CPF, in the presentation here, I'll stop there, super importantly, seeing more public resources, more government resources on these topics. This is what will make a difference, not our 20 billion or 2 billion a year, although we have ambitious targets, so we'll make some difference, but to have a macro effect difference, it will be mobilizing private investment, but fundamentally mobilizing more fiscal resources in education, in health, in water and sanitation. So for example, in education, Pakistan spends about half what countries of similar income spend on public education. That explains these numbers. In health, it's a bit less than half what countries of the income level of Pakistan spend. These are just averages. Some countries spend even more. Same thing on social protection. It's about a third where other countries spend. Even if BISP is a wide program, many households targeted, but when you look at the numbers, it's still smaller than similar programs in other countries like Indonesia, Mexico, or Egypt. And that applies in water and sanitation. It's even worse. The public spending, private sector won't make money in rural water and sanitation services. There needs to be some sustainable means to pay for maintenance, but basically this is an area where the initial investment will need to be from the government. And that brings me, and sorry to be long, the argument to say that making progress in this area will require massive increase of public spending brings me to today, where there is no public spending available, where the fiscal situation is what it is. So the difficulty in thinking long term on these social issues and be out of this short-term trap of always thinking about addressing current crisis is to have a transition from the current situation to a situation where more fiscal resources will be available, not only to stabilize the economy and fix the deficits, but that more resources will be available for education, health, and water and sanitation, etc. And we estimate the needs probably around at least 3 percentage points of GDP, maybe 2. I don't know. I have debates with our fiscal economists on that. So the needs are huge, and they are not available today. So how do you get out of this trap? To get out of this trap, obviously 2 things will be needed, and they're related. Going back to a sustainable growth path, so having a growth acceleration that follows this stabilization of the economy. And we have to credit the government and the people, because this has been costly to everyone. The economy is stabilizing, inflation is down, reserves are up, things are on the right track. The difficult equation today is from the current stabilization to growth, to a sustainable growth response that's made of private investment, and that's meant of productivity growth. What is needed? What will trigger a restoration of confidence of investors, domestic investors to start with, but also international investors, so that what follows this stabilization is a new growth path that sustains. That's the positive scenario. The negative scenario is the one we've seen in previous cycles like this. 2021, 2018, we've gone, these boom and bust cycles we've gone through the history of Pakistan over the past 2-3 decades have been similar. The difficulty is that at some point after stabilization, there's always a temptation and a pressure to go back to unsustainable fiscal spending to boost growth in a manner that's not sustainable and that just prepares the next crisis. And that's where Pakistan is today. It's at a turning point. Will it go back over the coming 18 months to the previous unsustainable cycle of an unsustainable spending to boost growth? Or will it start, or is this Pakistan's moment, and will it be on a more sustainable growth path that is driven by investment and productivity and not by consumption boosted by fiscal spending? That's the very difficult question. Is this Pakistan's moment? Every country that has started growing faster has had its moment. It's usually a crisis. India 91, Thailand 97. Every country has had their moment where you can say, this was the moment where the crisis was so severe, the reforms became credible, and things changed, and then the path things change in terms of the policy making in a sustainable and steady way, and therefore investors believe this was the moment and things started growing. Potential of Pakistan is huge. We talked this morning about manufacturing potential, industry potential. I believe in it. It's huge. The question is, what will trigger in the expectations of investors that this is the moment? And that's a difficult question to answer. I put myself in the shoes of the decision makers. It's not that easy, because economists, we're good experts at explaining things. In India, it was one thing. They didn't fix everything. India was a mess in the 90s, but they fixed the import controls, the license reg. When you read predictions in 91, nobody believed this would change much in India, but it did. And same thing in every other country. Egypt 2004, although it didn't last too long, but Egypt 2004, there was a few things they did. What is the set of reforms in Pakistan over the coming 12 months that will really convince everyone that this is Pakistan's moment and it's going on a sustainable growth path? If you go on a sustainable growth path, and maybe it doesn't need to be 7 or 8%, maybe it's 5%, and that will generate positive expectations and a positive cycle that will reinforce itself, and that will create the resources to spend on health, education, and the social services. And I believe this may be Pakistan's moment, but what will it take in the coming 12 months beyond stabilization is something you as private sector would know better than I as an economist, because you know what will convince you and your partners, your clients, and your industries that this is the moment to invest. Thank you very much.